and welcome to The Bookshelf at the Institute of South Asian Studies in Singapore, where we look at books pertinent to the study of contemporary South Asia. I'm John Vater, a research associate at the Institute, and today we will be discussing the very timely book, One Mountain, Two Tigers, India, China, and the High Himalayas. Today we'll be discussing the book with the editor, Mr. Shakti Sinha, who is also the honorary director of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute in Baroda of Policy Research and International Studies. Mr. Sinha, it's very wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So this book is very timely in the sense that the launching point was really something that just happened a few months ago in mid-June with the border standoff between India and China in eastern Ladakh. And the book proceeds to examine, as you say in your preface, the full gamut of bilateral relations. So I thought that we could perhaps begin by focusing a bit on this very compelling title, One Mountain, Two Tigers. Not long ago, there was quite a bit of conversation about the cooperative framework that India and China were entering into, multipolarity in the 21st century. And yet there is a sense that maybe things have shifted with this recent dispute. And so what are the windows and the important perspectives that this book has to offer in understanding what perhaps might be a change?
Thank you, John, for that question. Of course, I'll just spend very quickly on the title. The title is we are using an old Chinese proverb which says that on one mountain there can only be one tiger, to say that in the world that we have emerged, we cannot have such zero-sum attitudes. Asia is a big continent, the world is big, and there's a need for countries to work with each other. Now, obviously, countries have disputes for various reasons. Let's not go into which country is right or wrong. That's a matter of negotiations. But we should not let the disputes come in the way of developing larger cooperative frameworks, because it is one world, one future. And that has been the guiding principle. And we wanted to highlight that. How to bring about that? And therefore, we needed to, one, bring clarity to the historical process, which we thought was muddled up. We wanted to bring some amount of evidence to show that life is not as simple as people make out to be. Also, how in this larger framework, other countries are involved, and how developments in China itself may be impacting on these things. So, keeping all this in mind, and the changing world, is it a new Cold War, is the unipolar regime of the United States, in this confused state of affairs, and with Corona, do we have an option but to try and settle things in a peaceful manner, accepting that there'll be disputes, but trying to reduce the areas of disputes as we go along and enlarge the areas of agreement. So that was basically what we wanted to bring forth in the book. The book is very detailed. It goes into Ladakh's history. It goes into the present military position in Ladakh. It goes into the 62 war and many other aspects of it, the soft power part of it. But basically to bring out that fact that yes, it is possible to move forward within a peaceful framework. And that is hope that we want to send the message across.
Yeah, a great aspect of the book is the detail that goes into the history aspects within India, but also aspects within China, which I found to be particularly interesting. It's stated in the book that Henry Kissinger once said that it is impossible to understand China. And you also quote Churchill as saying, similar to Russia, an enigma wrapped in a mystery. And so in the final chapter of the book, you attempt to kind of look past some of the myths to examine what some of the domestic factors could be that explain actions on the Chinese side. And you write, of this idea that the limits of the horizon of the China dream, may be closing. So could you elaborate a little bit on that concept and what it means for China's behavior?
Absolutely. That China has grown amazingly in the last 4 decades is something we have to accept. No country in history has grown the way China has grown. The way it has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. The way it has become the factory of the world. And today, the field of technology, high technology, China is right at the cutting edge. All this is happening. Militarily, again, it's now the largest navy in the world. Nobody could have thought of that even 10 years ago. So this amazing constellation of factors has come about. But what I'm worried about is that on various aspects within China, one is the technology, the economy factor. China grew through investments, massive investments, which it has continued. And therefore it became the factory of the world, the largest exporter in the world. But now as a society moves up the income ladder, as skills come up, you'll have to lose out, you have to give up on the lower end jobs and try to move to a higher end. Now that process of restructuring is complicated. The West had the luxury of time, centuries, not decades. China has to do it very quickly. Because you want to ultimately have a higher standard of living. You have to move from being the exporter of the world to be largely driven by consumption, domestic consumption, because that's what brings about quality of life improvements. But the transition is complicated. Look at America's Rust Belt to understand how complicated such transitions can become. Because the people who lose out, because the wages in China have gone up, technology has gone up, lose out to the new factories coming up in Vietnam, in Bangladesh, and elsewhere, they literally can't move up the skill ladder. So what do you do with them? So you face a social unrest situation. China also has seen massive amount of industrialization and therefore pollution. And in the process, because property laws and of course rule of law is not well entrenched, a lot of social issues regarding land grabbing and people losing out on land. So you have this, it's not anymore subterranean, it has come up quite a bit. Land and pollution and this fact that people have no futures, a lot of them. How do you do that transition? What makes it worse, of course, is that you're moving into a high-end field. Those people you have, but where are the markets for those fields? If the world economy tanks, what do you do with your high-end exports? And I think for China, the greatest problem now is what we thought was the biggest success, people, population. 2017 was the last year the Chinese population actually had an increase. They had 17 million births that year. The next year it fell to 15 million. It is falling. The total replacement, the replacement rate, as they say, fertility rate of women should be 2.1 to maintain population. So in the course of a lifetime, a woman gives birth to an average of 2.1 child. China is half of that now, which means that the Chinese population is shrinking. The West has made up through immigration. Though it causes its own problems, West has used immigration to make up for the fall in population. USA, of course, has natural growth plus immigration, before Donald Trump, that is. What do you do in a situation where by the year 2050, this is 30 years away, very short horizon in the time of what we are looking at, China's working population will be 200 million less. So your dependency ratio, the number of people who are not working, who need either children or need pensions, is going up very fast. And by the year 2100, on present projections, the second largest country in the world in population will be the United States, not China. So does China age before she becomes rich? China's demographic profile is suggesting that. And therefore, the window of opportunity for the Chinese leadership, economically, demographically, and I would suggest politically, is getting shorter and shorter. And therefore, the need for China leadership to push hard. Will you push hard on your neighbors? And that is where the problem arises. And that is what is something which frightens, well, not frightens, it is worries a lot of people. How do you manage China's transition without causing a disruption in the global stability and the global security relations? That is what comes up.
And there are disruptions happening all over the world, within the US, within China. And so part of analyzing the disruption is also, like you said, what are the relationships with the surrounding neighboring states? When the book was coming out, there were a lot of inaccuracies, that were floating around in the media trying to assess, what is it that is happening? How do we best deal with the problem? And that, kind of, from what I understand, became the germ of the idea of this book. How can we, set some of the facts and set the record straight? I'm curious about the process that went into the compilation of this book. I mean, it is very wide-ranging and robust in the number of, different issues you decide to look at. So how did you decide on, what issues should we look at? And what was the process of working with all of the authors like?
It's a really tough one, because I was very upset when I read newspapers reports that you're confusing the Karakoram highway, which is about a million miles away from the Karakoram Pass. oh, if this happens, India will upset the CPEC. No, that's very far away. So suddenly I realized that so much was happening with so little of knowledge. So I spoke to my publisher and he said, let's do out the book really fast. And I've never seen a book come out so fast. So we did not go for, what should I say, very well developed long-term assessments. We looked at people who had worked on the subject and who could basically write long essays to explain things, you know. So therefore, economics, which I wanted much greater, I had to limit economics because that would require much greater study. But I wanted to bring out the key focuses. So we had to decide what to leave out actually, because on China, you can write and write and write, but that would not be helpful. So we thought we'll bring in some of the historical elements to it, especially explaining Aksai Chin in Ladakh and Western Tibet, which a lot of Indian strategic commentators even today confuse. They still think India has very weak case on Aksai Chin, which is actually the opposite. India has a very strong case on Aksai Chin and beyond, which China does not have. We had to understand the 62 war and its implications, but I also wanted to show that certain times the Chinese leadership, Communist Party leadership, has acted externally for democratic reasons. Mao Zedong, after the failure of the Great Leap Forward, etc., what pressure that he was under led to both 62 war, had implications for the 62 war and for the Cultural Revolution. Then you're looking at the Ladakh situation as it is today, the military standoff, what are the strategic implications for it, and how on the ground things are placed. And then look at factors, other factors. Say the Taiwan factor, we never look at it very seriously, or we looked at it in a very flippant manner. Oh, let's play the Taiwan card. That's an idiotic way, I'm sorry to say, very strong words, but that's not the way to look at these things. We look at it in a more mature manner. Look at the software implications. Look at where did we go wrong? Was Wuhan wrong? Was Mahabalipuram wrong? What was it that we were trying to achieve through this process? And of course, we wanted to look at what's happening in the world in the last 30, 40 years and how that is impacting on what is happening. So get a broader view, but basically brings some basic facts to knowledge of people so that to enable better decision making. We, of course, thought that by the time the book comes out, the crisis will be behind us. Today, I think this is going to continue for some time to come. And I really wish that I knew that in the sense that selfishly, that I could have brought in more factors into the book. But then we wanted the book out to basically put forward, as I said, the basic ground picture, a better understanding of that. Then people make your own decisions. I'm not saying you agree with me. Make your own decisions, but they know what has happened. Know that in China, the expenditure on internal security has exceeded the defense expenditure. It has gone up very sharply in the last 10 years. Now, what is the implication? I'm not telling you. I'm saying you something you don't agree. Understand these things. Understand why the Chinese were driven by GDP numbers, have dropped reporting GDP numbers. What does it mean? So just try to unpeel a bit of the onion and try to understand things. That was what basically. So therefore, we chose people who knew the subject and who could write in 1 month's time a 5,000 word piece. You know.
And the book is very well rounded, as you just laid out. There are aspects of the strategy on the ground, but also the book goes very far back into history and understanding some of the historical underpinnings, of the Eastern Ladakh region, relationships between Tibet and Ladakh. I believe it was Lord Curzon who said that this idea of demarcations on maps is a very modern concept, but the ancient world did not really have an understanding of. The beginning of the book jumps immediately, into history, and I was, because everything, is so fresh in our minds, we're very geared to think about what is happening now, and yet I'm pleasantly surprised to see, in this opening chapter, elements of linguistic etymology going back to Sanskrit. There were mummies that were being examined to look at some of, the demographic exchange. So. First of all, why do you think it's so important to understand the history of the subject? And then from there, can you talk a little bit about the rationale as the book develops? I saw that there were many great connections between the chapters.
Lovely. Thank you. Lovely question. Because it's unusual to have this in the book, I agree. I've been intrigued and I've been studying China for 45 years, off and on. The Chinese claims on territories and the Chinese concept of China has changed historically a lot. Look at China. Where is the Great Wall and where is China's northern border? 1,000 miles gap. So China has expanded a lot. But they always justify anything as China as something with the Chinese dynasty had ever conquered. Now dynasties change, they grow, they become small, they become big. But to claim all that as historical China, I thought was carrying it too far. I mean, at one time, the Tang dynasty had entered Central Asia and was clashing with the Iranians in what is now Central Asia. Based on that, Jiang Zemin mentions a famous Chinese scholar who's born in Kazakhstan. So this used to be China. China has just made a claim on the Pamirs very strongly now that this is basically China. And I wanted to show that if you use history this way, it can go against you. What is now Xinjiang was very much a part of the larger Indic world. Sanskrit was being used, Prakrit was being used, all the texts were there. Everything you notice about it, references in Indian epics about that area, Uttar Kuru, and how important it was to the larger Indic world view. Till the year about 1,000 years ago, 1,000 Common Era, it was very much part. Till the Uyghurs came in and then that disrupted the links and then the conversion to Islam and therefore looking westwards rather than looking southwards to India for Buddhism and Hinduism reasons. And the fact that Sanskrit was used up to Sian, Changan, as I said, all the way. Just to say that history, look at it very carefully, don't jump to conclusions. If you are saying that anywhere where the Chinese emperor had ever conquered China today, well, the Mongolians had conquered a lot of China. Will you say today that China is part of Mongolia? Are the Manchurians, whom we ignore completely by calling them the Qing dynasty, all of eastern Siberia and all of northeastern China was Manchuria. And they, Qing dynasty, ruled China for a long time, the last dynasty. They have clearly dealt with the Manchu people and the Chinese differently in the dress, in the way they keep their hair, etc. So all this is fresh in memory. So don't use history for very limited purposes. Try to understand history, that in history changes do take place. Respect the changes and don't make outlandish claims. So I think we needed to establish that. Also, this defensiveness we have about the North, about Kashmir being a colonial problem and the borders being colonial, we wanted to break that. We have very good evidence in two of the chapters, how the Ladakh grew and how Ladakh and Tibet were clashing with each other very strongly in the 15th, 16th, and the 17th century. That to call Ladakh a part of Tibet is completely wrong. In fact, a lot of the central western Tibet, the old Guge kingdom, was part of Ladakh actually. And that wherever the war is taking place, near Mount Kailash, famous Gang, that is the famous battle which is taking place. So Rawar Singh goes there as late as the 1841. So for the Ladakhis and the rulers of Ladakh, which included the rulers of Kashmir after 1840s, for them, this part was part of their kingdom, their worldview. It is not that it was part of any Chinese or Tibetan this thing. So, and the fact that the Mensar villages particularly, near the base of Mount Kailash, was under the control of Ladakh and therefore the Jammu Kashmir Raj till the 50s. In fact, it mentions in the 1911 census, 1921 census, the Kushak Bakula, minister of Ladakh, goes to Mansarovar in the 1954, collects taxes from those villages and brings it back. In 58, the Kashmir does a revenue settlement. See, every 30 years, you do the assessment of revenue of villages. It's called revenue settlement. The settlement of 1958 of Ladakh, 110 villages, included the 6 villages of Mensar. So this was Indian territory, and yet it does not figure in anywhere. So we needed to bring these facts out, and we thought, therefore, that history is important to show that India has a good case. I mean, Bhutan had villages there, which was gifted to them by the king of Tibet, the king of Ladakh, because Ladakh and Bhutan had combined forces. They were Drupkas against the Geluks of the 5th Dalai Lama onwards to Tibet. So this is the kind of historical evidence is there. And therefore, we need to understand history much, much better. And that's why it comes from there that we needed to bring history, that history is nuanced. It's not, don't always feel defensive about it. Use history, but it can be used for both sides. And therefore, you should understand each other much, much better. What are the villages? Saidullah doesn't sound very Chinese or Tibetan to me. That is in across Aksai Chin. So, these ones because the Baltistan people were there, and therefore these Muslims names are there, Garkot in just near Mansarovar. Again, Garkot is not a Tibetan name. It's a name from this side of the Himalayas, but it's across the Himalayas. Just to show that people had control, dealt with, and extensively dealt with trading and politically with this part of the world.
And to shift, I suppose, from the far ancient past and to try to begin to look into the future, as you said, the border situation is still evolving. There were many different insights that were generated from this book. You said at the time that, it was coming out, there are many factors that you wish, you had been able to include. So perhaps there will be, chances for another book in the future. What are some of the things that people should be keeping an eye on as the situation develops, particularly for scholars here at the Institute of South Asian Studies or anyone interested in India-China relations who may be watching this video right now?
I would look very hard, again, at the Chinese internal economy, how the economy is doing, how the relationship with the world is happening. See, decoupling is a word used. I mean, you don't decouple it. You got investments are not just say investments are there. You need those products, right? Countries don't trade, companies trade, and why do companies trade? Because they get a good deal. If I want to buy a bottle of water, I look for the guy who gives me at a decent price, not somebody who charges me $100 a bottle, right? So you have to keep this in mind. So what is happening with this trading relationship? But at the end of the day, it works both ways in the sense that India has certain leverage, say, over other countries which deal with China, say Australia and Germany, because we import, we don't export. When you import, you have a greater leverage in saying, thank you very much, I'll pay a price, but I won't buy from you. When you export, if China doesn't buy from you, where do you go? So, if you don't understand economic logic, you will not understand why countries work the way they do. And therefore, if you are watching China and watching India-China relationship, I would watch the Chinese economy and the linkages with Indian economy, trade, investment very, very carefully. I would obviously do that. Two, I would definitely watch internal political happenings in China. If you look at what is happening in the Communist Party, if you look at the fact that 3 successive vice ministers of public security have been arrested, not very easy to do that. 3 very, very senior people have been arrested. One used to be the head of the Interpol, in fact, Meng Wanghai. Then the other 2, Lee and Sun, they've all been arrested. All were close to Ru Yonggang, who was the then Minister for Public Security and a very senior leader, Jiang Zemin faction, who helped usher in Xi Jinping. So you can see these changes happening in China, that the Chinese worldview is changing from a world which thought we could accommodate the leadership, we thought they could accommodate the world, to a leadership who now says we'll no longer bide our time and hide our capabilities, but push upwards. I mean, I'm not saying that China has democracy, but obviously they have different points of view. And if you don't watch the changes happening in China's internal development, possibly you'll miss out some of the external factors because you can't de-link the two. I mean, somebody wants to settle the border today. Somebody says, no, we have time on our side. I'll wait for the next generation. Taiwan, I'll settle it in my lifetime, but India border, I'll sort out in the next generation. Why? I mean, these are the kind of questions you can only understand if you understand Chinese. A bit of, all of us guess about Chinese politics. A lot of it can be very wayward, but I think it's necessary to read and read translations. So if you don't read Chinese, read translations of not the Global Times, but the Chinese newspapers. If you do that, you have far more nuanced understanding of the discussions happening within China. I think these are the 2 key factors that I really think that, or internal developments like why is the People's Armed Police, earlier answerable to the State Council and indirectly to the Chinese Military Commission, now answerable only to the Chinese Military Commission, which means even within the top leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, the centralization, you're mistrusting your own State Council, Council of Ministers, the cabinet, and taking it on directly. These are just certain happenings within China. We can guess at the implications, but I think we should try to make a more nuanced understanding of that.
Well, Mr. Sinha, thank you so much for the nuanced understanding that you helped to share through this book and also through all of your answers to these questions. I would hold up a copy of the book, but regrettably, given some of there we are.
So thank you. It's a very pleasure talking to you. I hope I've been able to convey some of the nuance. It's actually far more complex, but obviously in an interview, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, this is the best that we can do. Thank you for very good questions, I must say. You forced me to do a lot of quick thinking, and I hope I got some of them right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being us on the bookshelf, and we look forward to hopefully speaking with you again soon.
Thank you. Pleasure.